Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. We can start this. Good morning, everyone. We can start this new event of 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗧. I give the floor to Professor Forward, who is the coordinator of this event.
Well, I think you're the coordinator, actually, to tell the truth. Okay. Well, on behalf of the university, I'd like to welcome Magnus 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗧, who's the founder and executive chairman of Mary's Meals, 𝗕𝗔𝗽𝗽𝗂𝗀𝗢𝗍, who's the president of Mary's Meals in Italy, and 𝗕𝗔𝗽𝗽𝗂𝗀𝗍, executive director of Mary's Meals in Italy. I think this is a suitable venue, Rome, both because of the name of this very praiseworthy organization, and also because Italy has a very high level of voluntary work, one of the highest in the Western world. So it's a very suitable thing to have our guests today dedicating their time and energy to telling us about what they do, and we'd like to thank them very much indeed for this initiative. In particular, Mr. 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗧 will talk about his book, which has been published in Italian with the title 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗍 di vivere con generosità. It was published in English with the title Give, Charity and the Art of Living Generously, which is a very beautiful title, particularly in the Western world where increasingly we see selfish individualism. So this is the idea of giving, of generosity, of responsibility towards other people. Now this book describes the poorer countries of the world. Now the organization is not confessional, as many in Italy are, that's to say of the Catholic Church within the Catholic Church. But as one can understand from the name of the organization and from the character of this book and many of its leading figures, they derive inspiration and energy as a very fitting place from that point of view for its presentation. Now, the idea was to link the speeches of our guests and the presentation of this book to the teaching chair of contemporary world history. And I'd just like to make a few very general introductory points linked to contemporary world history. Now, during our course, which has been 1945 to 1990, we've addressed in the history of the West the very important question, which bears on the whole question of how much should associations do and how much should, or what individuals should do. So it's a very important question about Western societies and future Western civilization, is who and what should seek to engage in these kinds of activities of social solidarity and social responsibility. Another issue we've been talking about during this course is, of course, aid programs coming out of the Western world. We saw, for example, very important aid programs of the United States of America, 1945 right through to the early 1970s at very, very big levels. And today we still have the question, and it's a debated question, of how much aid should be provided by the wealthiest nations, of course. It's not only the West. Now, another question, of course, is the role of voluntary action and non-governmental organizations. And Mary's Meals is one of these. The history also in the West of voluntary initiatives, voluntary activity, voluntary associations. And of course, the Catholic Church has a long history of action in this sphere. One can think of many religious orders who do this kind of thing. Let's think, for example, of the Chameleon.
For this introduction. Well, good afternoon, everyone, both people here in presence and those connected online. My name is Maria Felicita, and for those who do not know me, that are seeing live this event on Mary's Meals page on YouTube and Facebook. I'm a student of the master's degree in international relations here at LUMSA University, as well as the co-founder and active member of 𝗕𝗔𝗴𝘂𝘂𝗀𝗍 𝗕𝗏𝗍 internazionali, which is a project created by the students. Can I ask people online if they are able to see the screen? Just a brief feedback.
Those people are very dangerous because we have a lot of misery, we have a lot of hunger.
I was born in 𝗕𝗔𝗴𝘂𝗂𝗍.
They must leave
It's
not easy for
one
them
of
to
the most dangerous places of Haiti.
It's very hard because one of
Those
the
people are very dangerous
take
because
with
they have a lot of
education.
misery, they have a lot of hunger, and then they must leave every day, so it's not easy for them to keep living every day. It's very hard because one of the things that can take
If
them out
I'm
is
hungry,
education.
you know, sometimes I misbehave.
A lot of winners were complaining, I'm sick, I'm having stomachache, I'm having scared. It was truly hard.
If I'm hungry, you know, sometimes I misbehave.
A lot of winners were complaining, I'm sick, I'm having stomachache.
At all in a day before they came to school. Now they're motivated to come to school. They're motivated to be part of that community. They can focus. They don't need to run away and scavenge and or fall asleep in class.
Now they're motivated to come to school. They're motivated to be part of that community.
They can
Focus
education
on education,
so
run away and scavenge or fall asleep in class.
We've noticed there has been a reduction in the number of
Doctor, a lawyer, there's
I've seen this incredibly efficient.
None of us do anything spectacular.
When the Bosnian conflict was making headlines in early 1990s, Magnus and his brother Fergus were moved to help. From that moment on, a series of events that he will soon, I think, share with us, would have led him to found Mary's Meals in 2002, in particular after a trip in Malawi. He's married Julie, a trained nurse who became his co-driver on some of the first deliveries of aid to Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1993, and has been devoted to the charity ever since. They live in Dalmony, Scotland with their 7 children. He was named one of the 2010 top 10 heroes by broadcaster CNN and received an OBE in 2011 New Year's Honors List. Magnus has also been awarded honorary degrees by University of Stirling, Glasgow Caledonian University and the University of Hull. So today we are going to present Magnus' last book, which is entitled Give the Art of Living Generously. Before showing you another video that is quite smaller than the previous one, I just want to remind everyone that at the end of this speeches of our speakers, we have the opportunity to interact, to actively participate through considerations, doubts, questions. And I want to remind to the people connected online for privacy reasons that if they want, they can decide to not... Here we are again. Well, I had the pleasure to read this book in the last weeks and last month, and having empathy with our best friend or our parents, for example. And in addition, we have even to say that sometimes when we practice charity, there's the risk to fall into hypocrisy by donating to distant places and ignoring the fact, as I said before, the people around us. So this is even something that has to do with many corruption, sad stories in which the many ONG in the past was involved in. And then from the title of the book, we understand that giving is not only an expression of generosity, but an art. So I sincerely apologize to my guest for having taken too much time to his speech, and I'm giving you the floor, Mr. Magnus, by asking you what transforms charity giving into art. What were the turning points that led to the creation of Mary's Meals and the main difficulties and challenges you face with? And if you see the act of providence in your activities. Thank you.
Hello everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you first of all for inviting me for that great introduction. Thank you, Professor Ford, for your kind words as well. This verse is something that points to the wonder of our humanity, the wonder of the human being. You know, I think charity is one of those hallmarks that sets us apart. So, when we think about charity as an art, it certainly shouldn't be at the risk of ever thinking we shouldn't do those instinctive things when we can help immediately. I suppose at the same time, though, in thinking about the journey I've had and the experiences I've had, I can see that charity can go wrong as individuals when we practice it, and especially if we become people who are organised superior than them. If we start to think the giver is just like an ATM machine and we're trying to apply marketing techniques to extract money from them, it starts to go wrong. I think if we look at the scandals that charitable organisations have caused in recent times, I think if you trace them back, they normally begin with a loss of respect for the people that they are serving. So that's just a few thoughts on that first question. You keep me right, please, on time if I'm going too long. What were the turning points that led to the creation of Mary's Meals? I'll maybe just talk briefly about two turning points. The first was, I never intended to do this work. This isn't what I planned to do with my life. I'm not qualified to do it. I'm a salmon farmer, a fish farmer. And that's what I was doing as a young man in the Highlands of Scotland, where I lived. And in 1992, my brother and I watched a television report about how refugees were suffering during the war in Yugoslavia during the 90s. And over a pint of beer in our local pub, we said to each other, wouldn't it be great if we could just do something small to help? So we organised a little effort, asked people to give us food and clothing. I took 1 week's holiday from work, drove the goods to Bosnia, delivered them in a refugee camp, and then I came home to Scotland thinking I'd done my good deed, now I'll go back to work as normal. And then I discovered God had a completely different plan, because all these things I'd asked for continued to pour in. People were giving me more and more food and clothing and medicines, and I had this mountain of these things. I suddenly realised it was going to be a lot harder to stop this than it had been to start, because people are so good. When we write down our organisational values for Mary's Meals, one of the key ones for us is we have confidence in the innate goodness of people. And we build so much of our approach around that, and it's not just nice words, it's our experience over and over again that people are good. So that's how I first got involved in this work, and for the first 10 years there was no real theme or focus. We were just doing all kinds of things to help. We were being invited to help street children in Latin America, or during the war in Liberia in West Africa we were doing emergency help. We were opening homes for children in hospitals in Romania, all kinds of things. And then in 2002 Mary's Meals was born. It was born in Malawi, Southeast Africa. That was a year of terrible famine. We were there doing emergency feeding programs, and I met this family. And the father of the family had just died, and now the mother, when I was sitting around her, and I began talking to her oldest child. He was called Edward. He was 14 years of age. And at one point in the conversation I asked Edward, what's my life? Because they would all say, I never would have gone inside the school without Mary's Meals. I might not be alive without Mary's Meals. And there they are now, leaders in their communities, leaders of change in their communities. So this simple act of charity works in the immediate and in the long term. Sorry, I'm talking too long. I'll speed up with the last few questions. Most difficult challenges I faced along the way. Many challenges, and I probably touched on them already. You know, as the organisation grows and gets bigger and more people are involved, and there are many different parts to the organisation, how do we retain this as a work of love? How do we keep those most important things that were present at the very beginning? That simple desire to serve the person in need in front of us. How do we make sure we don't get wrongly focused on numbers? Numbers are really important. We need to measure the data to prove this works. But how do we do that? How do we do the strategic planning that's necessary without losing sight of this just being a simple work of love? So our organisational values for us are so important, that we take time as the work grows around the world to really spend time thinking about what are our values, what makes Mary's Meals unique. I believe many organisations go wrong because they don't spend enough time on that. They start doing something very good, and then they see something else they could do, and they need something else, and they get confused, or the people who support them get confused about what is it, what's their identity, what's their expertise, what's their focus and mission. And so we're spending a lot of time on that, who we are, what makes Mary's Meals unique. You know, how do we retain that focus? We believe that we are called to do one important thing and to do it very well, and not to pretend that we're experts at other things. And that's a challenge, retaining that focus when we see so many other needs. For good reasons you might want to do other things. So that's one challenge I would mention. Finally, last question, I'll just tell you one story in answer to this. Have you ever had short answer, many times, every day? You know, I believe this is all dependent on God's providence. The one particular example at the beginning, early years collecting aid to take to Bosnia. Something went wrong on one of our journeys to Bosnia. I don't have time to tell you the details today, but basically we had to spend all the money that we had in our bank account then to solve this problem and to get the aid into Bosnia. I remember exactly the amount. It was £4,200. And so I was driving home to Scotland, and I suddenly began to panic, because I realised we had all these commitments and obligations, and all the aid was piling up, and I needed to drive into Bosnia, and this £4,200 that we needed had gone. And I was praying about this and really worried. And when I arrived home, my wife met me, and she said, "Oh, Magnus, there's a letter I think you better have a look at." And I opened it. Now I was getting even more worried that something else had gone wrong. And when I opened it, I found inside a cheque for £4,200 from a priest in Ireland who said he wanted to be anonymous. He didn't even want us to send him a thank you letter. Nobody else knew that we needed £4,200 exactly, apart from Julie and no one. And I've experienced so many. I've had so many experiences like that of God's providence, and I think on that occasion at the beginning of our work, God just wanted us to know, very clearly He wanted us to know that when we step out in a work like this, He's got our back. He'll give us everything we need, always, and that's been my experience. Sorry if I went a bit long.
It's okay. Thank you, Mr. 𝗕𝗟𝗏, for this, I'd say, inspiring words, and even for reminding us that at the end it is worthwhile to have a risk, and when we choose charity. Unfortunately, we'd like to speak more with you, but I have to give the floor to our next guest. And now it's time to present you Mr. 𝗕𝗟𝗏𝗂𝗀, President of Magnus, Italy. Before giving him the floor, let me just briefly introduce his career. Mr. 𝗕𝗏𝗂𝗀 holds an engineering degree and has studied at MIT Boston, Cambridge University and Bocconi University. He has worked as an executive in large infrastructure and consulting firms in Italy and abroad, where he implemented projects in 20 countries, primarily in Europe, Middle East and Africa. He has held and continues to hold important positions such as General Manager, Managing Director and Board Member. He is currently working for a large Italian company on energy innovation and development, as well as decarbonization, and he is involved in several European research projects. After volunteering in a variety of capacities, he fell in love with the simplicity and effectiveness of Mary's Mills, for a more just and fraternal world. He's married to Isabella and has 2 daughters, and he has 3 wonderful gifts. Good afternoon, Mr. 𝗕𝗏𝗂𝗀, and welcome. Thank you for being here with us. Well, we all know, even as international relations students, that in the set up the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, a collection of 17 interlinked global goals that are intended to be
Ogni società deve fare un bilancio economico-finanziario in cui sostanzialmente il mondo giudica questa società su quanti soldi ha fatto. Questo è stato un po' come è andata avanti fino ad oggi, in poche parole.
So in brief words, companies always think
L'acqua e le materie prime che
fruitful contribution to people, so not just concentrating on exploiting nature and the environment, but
le aziende da solo non possono farcela, perché le aziende hanno un primario obiettivo di offrire i loro servizi. Quindi tra la collaborazione tra una delle grandi aziende e delle NGO si possono raggiungere dei risultati che sono ottimali per entrambe.
Magnus has provided a very good example on how a collaboration between corporations and NGOs can really have a
solidari. For give you an example, could be a solidarity marketing, but I'm happy. Okay, I don't go to university, but I'm happy was very strange to me. So I called this guy in order to verify that was not a fraud or something like that, because you can imagine it's something that happens sometimes. And he just, in a very simple way, explained me that during the lockdown, the university closed. I feel very sad, and it's time to go more through social channels, and discovered our Generation Hope campaign. And he understood that if in Italy university closed, school closed, was very hard to live. In Mary's Mills countries, school closed means no food. And no food is be safe, no? It's a life risk, was another plan. The reason why he decided to consecrate his lockdown time, creating this fundraising project and ask his friends to watch a generation of film and help people to go to school, not only to get an education, but also to be alive, because school changed lives in every sense, and this touched me much. Simple.
Thank you, Mrs. Towie, for this experience and for having shown us that with little things we can do really something extraordinary. Now we have reached the second part of our event. It is time for asking questions and giving your personal considerations on what we have previously talked about, and all of our guests are going to answer you. I kindly ask the people connected online just to book themselves in the chat if they have any questions, and I will make sure to give them the floor and to let them speak. Just to break the ice, I'd like to ask a banal question, but it's really important this time. What has been the impact of COVID-19 in Magnus activities, both in Italy and abroad?
So maybe I'll take the abroad bit, you can take the Italy bit, Sylvia. It was a huge impact because in most of the countries where we serve the meals, schools were closed for long periods of time. Obviously our mission is all about meals in schools. But we recognised very quickly that while there might be a good reason to close schools for public health reasons, there's never a good reason to stop feeding the children. So we had to adapt our model very quickly so that the children could eat at home. So that was in the form of parents coming to our stores, our food stores at the schools, and being given the food to take home, to cook at home for their children. So in this way, we've been able to keep our promise to the children through this time of school closures. And that's really only been possible because our project is genuinely a locally owned work. So it's local community leaders, the schools that really lead this work day to day. And it was them that came up with the solutions that we needed to find.
At the end, for us, COVID was an opportunity. Straight to tell that was like that, because it was for us the opportunity to strengthen communication activities and to join people with communication that in another way was impossible more in Italy. So it was at the end of history was also an opportunity for us.
Thank you. I don't know if there's someone here in presence who would like to ask a question to our guest. I have Gianluca next to me. The floor is yours.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank everybody for being here at this event, and our kind guests for their teaching and for transmitting us this beautiful mission that touched us very, very, very well. And I would like in particular to ask Mr. Magnus a question concerning crisis which for organized charity have to face every day. And were there any particular scandals or cases of corruption in the past? And if yes, how were they dealt with? Thank you very much.
So, thankfully we've had no major cases of corruption or scandal in Mary's Meals. Every day in the environments we're working in, but thank God we haven't experienced any major scandal or fraud. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Magnus. And as you said even before, what is important is that the head works with the heart. So if these two things goes in their own way, the main mission of Mary's Meals, or in general any ONG in particular, cannot be achieved. So if there are more questions from here in presence. I give the floor to this lady.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just had a question about how did you get the food over there? Like, do you work with local farmers, or do you like more get food in Europe and send them to them through some companies, or how do you do it actually?
Thank you very much for this question, because I didn't have an opportunity to explain that very important part of our model. So as much as possible, we buy the food locally from the local farmer. You know, for obvious reasons, we want to support the local farmer, we want to really build the local economy. And again, that sense of local ownership, we want this to be sustainable. We want these school feeding programs that we are setting up to continue beyond the need for outside help. So in every sense, including the food, we want it to be a local solution. So that's great. So in our biggest programs, like Malawi is our biggest, 1 million children eat only in Malawi, 30% of the primary school population there. All of those meals, the food is grown and produced in Malawi. So that's wonderful. In some other situations, we want to do that, but we can't. Like in conflict situations, South Sudan today, or Ethiopia, or even Haiti, to an extent, we're having to import some food. But when we do that, we're always looking for ways, opportunities to help local food production. Not directly, we're not experts in agriculture, but for example, in South Sudan recently, we partnered with an organization who were encouraging people who've been fighting for many years, soldiers, to put down their weapons and to begin farming again. And simply by saying to them, maize meals can buy all year round anything the produce that you grow for our program, that gave those people the courage to take that step and to begin farming again. And so there are many examples of that where we look for good, good initiatives in agriculture where we can help that happen. So this is a really, really important question.
Yes, thank you. I know that there's a question from a new active member of the 𝗕𝗔𝗡𝗢. He stands there in both sides.
Yeah, thank you to be here, and thanks to all our guests. And I would like to ask my question to Mr. Noli, because I listened a sentence that was very, that attracted me so much, and it was that the future is ours, and to engage ourselves. So my question is, how, for example, climate change affected and influenced the life of poor people? So how climate change affected the life of poor people in terms of, for example, migration?
Thank you very much for the question. Well, we all see that there are meteorological events that are changing, some more drought, or too much rain, no rain at all. But when it happens in Europe, there is no problem, more or less, or minor problem. When it happens in our program countries, this means that probably the people are not able to eat for months, or even to eat for 1 year. And so, unfortunately, also with climate change, the people who pay the bill are the poorest. And so, on our side, we should and we could, on the other side, where the people that due to climate change have a serious problem.
Could I just add as well to that answer, just in the context of Mary's meals? We see so many examples of the poorest suffering the most through climate change. So right now there's a terrible famine developing in Madagascar where we work, and many would describe that as the first ever famine caused by
event, the end of our event, and I'd say we are very glad to have presented this journey into charity. And thank you, Mr. Magnus, for having taught us how to be good artists too. As you may have noticed, There is a desk in my left with some books, brochures, and I think bags. At the end of our meeting, you are all encouraged in presence to approach and pick up a copy if you like with a free offer. I'd like to
just add that if you want to discover more Mary's Meals, don't hesitate to visit our internet site, marysmeals.it, or just contact us to our social media or write to info@marysmeals.it. I will be happy to know you.
Thank you for this added information. I'd like to now thank again all our distinguished speakers for their insight. Distinguished both guests and to the participants, and I wish you everyone a good day, even to people connected online and who follow us on the YouTube.